We're going up and down, over and over. It's the same old thing. Up and down, over and under.
Well, Margaret, thank you very much for joining the show.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Ken. I really am. And we've just figured out that you might know a family member of mine.
I know. I had to stop myself because we could have kept talking for a whole hour and not even recorded any of it.
Well, we people in Arkansas love to chat. So
yes. How is life in Arkansas right now, by the way?
well, it's been a beautiful fall. I mean, fall here. I live in the middle of the Ozarks, so it's just
okay.
here, and we've had the same turbulence that everybody else has, COVID, and we're one of the hot spots, unfortunately, here in our part of the state. So we're all staying close to home, but Arkansas is a lovely place to be. Lots of very, very friendly people, good food, good music.
Yeah, I actually haven't been yet. You know, I think my company used to be headquartered out of Arkansas. I should really know that. If someone I work with, Axiom.
Oh yeah, they were for sure.
Yeah. And then I work for a company now called LiveRamp. I don't know if I should be sharing that, but anyways, so Arkansas, I know enough about it, but I've never been myself.
Well, a lot of people actually fly into my part of the state because we are the home for the Waltons and Walmart.
Oh, yeah.
Home for Tyson. So we've actually got this incredible little airport that has direct flights all over the world, and United States at least. And it's kind of, it's very nice for those of us who like to travel or you are looking forward again to traveling.
Yeah, I know. Have you done any travel during this whole pandemic?
No. My cardiologist looked at me and she said, "You're going to sit at home." So
okay.
Okay.
You're in lockdown. Yeah. So I think I told you before we started, but I have 3 young kids, and my brother kept postponing his wedding. It was supposed to be in Hawaii, and then that became clear it wasn't going to happen. So we did make the trip out to Seattle, and I don't know, the experience was not as bad as we thought it would be, but it's interesting. It's just a constant reminder, like you can't escape the fact that we're kind of living in this environment right now. Yeah. Everyone has a mask. Everything's different. I don't know. What are you going to do? Hopefully it's over soon, though.
We've got some good news on the forefront of things, so I'm looking forward to that for sure.
Exactly. Well, like I said, I am so excited to have you on the show today. For people who don't know yet, you wrote a book, and I think it came out last year, correct?
Just about this time last year, right?
Yeah, and it's titled "Perfectly Hidden Depression." And, your team was kind enough to send me a copy. And whenever I get a chance, like I always enjoy reading, especially when a guest is coming on. But what I have to say is I did not anticipate just how much I was going to relate to some of it, which to me, I was like, oh, no, I was just trying to do a little research. And I think you have, there's a quiz in one of the first few chapters. It's kind of like a self-assessment.
Yeah.
And they're yes/no questions. And at the end, it's like, hey, based on your total, generally, here's some guidelines as to where you might kind of fall. And I was looking at the total and I was like, oh boy, that's a little higher than I was hoping for.
We were talking a little bit before about the publishers that did not publish my book, but all of them, almost all of them, I would say 90% of the people who turned it down also said to me, this book really needs to get published. We're not going to do it, because I really responded to this, and so did some of the other people on staff. So I was very honored when New Harbinger decided to publish it. And Ken, I've never wanted to write a book. I have loved being a therapist. I love just that whole profession. I got good therapy when I was in my 20s, and so I turned my whole life around. I was a professional singer, and
no kidding.
And so it took me 8 or 9 years to turn that around, like I said, but I have adored being a therapist. This found me. This topic found me. So. That's why I've written the book. It took me, I wrote a blog post back in 2014 because I was thinking about some of the people that I had worked with over the years that when they walked in my door, they wouldn't have said they were depressed. They would have, in fact, quite the opposite.
Right.
And They maybe were there for some anxiety, or they were developing an eating disorder, or they were drinking a little too much, or their spouse said they needed to come in or something. They kind of look around and go, I really don't know why I'm here. I feel kind of funny.
Yeah.
But what I also noticed about all these people was that they didn't have language to use for painful emotion. They
Hmm.
smile and tell me these traumatic things that had happened. Like I'm talking like rapes and alcohol abuse of a parent and bullying, and I mean severe bullying and things like that, and go, well, things happen. And so I just wrote this post called "The Perfectly Hidden Depressed Person Are You One?" I just kind of pulled those words out of the hemispheres or somewhere,
Yeah. Yeah.
sky somewhere, and the post went viral. And then when it was on the Huffington Post, I was writing for them at the time. I forgot that I'd left my email on the bottom of the post, and I got hundreds of emails.
Oh, wow.
You're in my head. How do you know this is going on? And
Hmm.
so I was shocked. I thought, what is this? So nothing like that had happened before, I promise you.
Yeah.
And so I started looking, well, what's out there about
Hmm.
perfectionism and depression? And I found Brene Brown's work, which is all about vulnerability and shame and perfectionism. But even she did not link it to depression.
Hmm.
Researchers are doing that, but
Yeah.
that's more scholarly. So I got some encouragement from some of my enthusiastic blogger friends that said, go for it. And I sat down, and in 5 years, I had a book published. So called Perfectly in Depression, as you just said.
Yeah. Well, and so maybe a good place to start is can you explain a little bit about what perfectly hidden depression is? And I guess what I'm intrigued about is like why a lot of the things that you were seeing, kind of time and time again with some of the folks that you were working with, why it was not being identified as depression. And maybe that's because is the definition of clinical depression.
Exactly.
It's okay.
Right on target. The reason why it's not being diagnosed as depression is the fact that someone who walks in your door and starts talking to you about what's going on with them. For one thing, people with this, what I call a syndrome, don't
Hmm.
do a very good job of telling you what's really going on with them. But they don't fit classic criteria.
Ah.
And so the two of the major ones are depressed mood
Hmm.
for a certain amount of time that is noticeable to self or others. These people, again, don't see themselves as depressed. Other
Hmm.
people certainly don't see them as depressed. They're engaged, they're industrious, they're successful, they have happy families. Many of them have told me, people come up to them and say, your family is just perfect.
Hmm.
So these people don't look depressed, and they wouldn't call what was wrong with them depression at first.
Hmm.
The second classic criteria that has to be present, one or both of these, is called anhedonia, which means you don't find pleasure in things that were previously pleasurable. And that's hard to say.
Oh.
Previously pleasurable.
Yeah, I know. Jack
So,
jumped over a candlestick or something or
yeah.
other.
So, you give those criteria to clinicians, and it's, entrenched in us that you just don't classify someone as classically depressed unless they
Hmm.
at least want it. And then there's hopelessness, there's mental fog, there's indecisiveness, there's helplessness, there's low self-esteem, and all this stuff, suicidality.
Hmm.
Um, so that's why it's important, because I believe, and I'm not the only one to believe this, I just had the gall to write a book about it, I guess, is that these people are falling through the cracks and they're killing themselves. Because,
Yeah.
one of the things that was so wonderful and was such an honor and a blessing is that as I was trying to figure this out, I was writing blog posts about
Mhm.
what I was trying to ascertain. And at the bottom of those blog posts, I didn't put my email. I said, if you would contact me, if you identify with this, would you please contact me?
Yeah.
And so I had about 60, 70, 80 people do that over about 3 months period of time. And I called out some of them because they just didn't fit what I was looking at. Um, and and so I asked these people, you know, why have you reached out to me? Here I am, a perfect stranger.
Hmm.
You're telling me extremely confidential information. I had brain surgeons. I had one of the largest states in the United States, the head of their advertising for the entire state.
Oh,
I had
wow.
a motivational speaker who's pretty well known.
Yeah.
Um, I had these people reach out and I said, but why? And without a hesitancy, they said to me, because this is the loneliest and most despairing way of living your life I can
Mm,
imagine, because no one sees you. You are invisible. The real you is invisible. And you may hide it by, um, well, for your listeners, with athletic prowess and
yeah.
athletic success. You may hide it with financial success. You may hide it with just looking like you're always there for other people. And you've learned this strategy that sometimes is really not even conscious anymore.
Mm,
It's so automatic with you that you've done it for so long that until you see the words perfectly hidden depression, you kind of go, wait a minute, could is this something? You know,
mm,
and I don't want anyone else to live that life.
yeah.
That's why they told me their stories. And that's where the stories in the book come from.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's where they come from, is these people who reached out to me and told me how they had gotten to that strategy in their lifetimes, that they had to be perfect and
Mm.
had to appear perfect.
Well, and I told you this a little before we started too, it's been very challenging because just recently, my own inner circle, we've had two really good friends who've both lost fathers, both very successful by, I mean, any measure,
Yeah.
to suicide in a way that I think, both of them would say was completely unexpected. And it's so what you're saying, it's kind of like, yeah, like they were kind of hiding in plain sight. They were not the person that anyone would have pegged as depressed, unmotivated. Not that that's necessarily a characteristic, but they didn't fit the mold, I think, and a lot of folks don't of what you would uh, think of someone who's suicidal. So as I saw that title, I was kind of like, I took a step back too. I was like, oh wow, like
Yeah.
perfectly hidden depression, because that's what it is.
Yeah. You know, this is not the same thing, although probably people with this would also pick up the book and think, oh, this is about me.
Hmm.
But there's a certain thing called like high functioning depression or smiling depression.
Ah, okay.
The difference between those people and the people I'm trying to reach the most, although I certainly would love to help those people,
Yeah.
is that they know they're depressed. They just have devised some kind of way through
Oh,
skill
interesting.
set or through their um, I'm not putting down people who are depressed who can't do that. I mean, there are a lot of people whose depression is so severe they cannot.
Hmm.
The people that go to work, take their medicine, exercise, but know they're depressed.
Hmm.
And that's a certain kind of depression. But they would readily tell a trusted friend, "Yes, I'm really struggling here. I'm sad. I didn't want to get out of bed this morning." The people I'm most trying to reach, because I think they're in their most danger, are
Hmm.
people who really developed this. I'll call it again a strategy, to use a word I used a few minutes ago, in
Yeah.
order to handle, to manage, to emotionally survive whatever kind of family or culture, important there, culture
Hmm.
they were born into. And so let's say they had a parent or parents who were alcoholic. And so they had to become sort of a pseudo adult and take care of their other siblings.
Hmm.
Let's say they had a mother or father who sexually abused them, and they had to they developed this need to control. I mean, I need to control everything about me because I will never get hurt again.
Hmm.
Maybe they um, were the star of their family. and they were seen only for their accomplishments. They were seen as somebody who was really good at a sport or at academics or
Yeah.
at whatever. And so they needed to become this sort of shell of themselves. And that, because that's what they were known for. Maybe they just grew up in a family where nobody was allowed to talk about sadness or fear or anger. There are lots of families like that.
Right.
So there are lots of pathways there. But it's people who their perfectionism is not constructive. It's not the same as, gosh, I want to be the best version of myself I can be. Because that person can make a mistake. They can enjoy the process of trying for excellence. They can be in the moment, sort of, but if they don't win, it's like, well, okay, what did I learn? I always want to try to be my best. That's constructive perfectionism, striving for excellence. Destructive perfectionism is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought this up, because as I was reading the book too, I kept having that thought. I'm like, well, to some extent, some of these things feel like they could be a strength.
Oh yeah.
But so this is actually a really important differentiation to make. So and it's helping me rationalize some of this a little bit as well.
I didn't
Yes.
figure it out that distinctly until actually the book was written. It's one of those things I look back and think,
Yeah.
I knew as soon as this book was written and going to be published, I'd figure some other things out or learn some other things. So yeah, I try to make the distinction in the book, but it's not very well said, actually. But destructive perfectionism and the kind of depression and perfectionism that I'm talking about with perfectly hidden depression, which I think are equitable, is that what is fueling that is shame and fear. You are the person who was abused, say, physically, emotionally, sexually. They have to, then they're trying to be in control, and they are so afraid and so ashamed of what happened. They've never told a soul. And it is like, you're still that person that was traumatized. You're no better than your father treated you, or you'll never get this done, or you're no good at this, or this shame, this inner self-criticism and harsh judgment is there all the time. And so their perfectionism is trying to fight off those voices that are constant. I worked with a woman who, actually, I was working with her while I was writing the book, and I asked her 2 or 3 times if I could use what she just said in the book, because it was so eloquent. She was just incredibly eloquent.
Yeah.
And she said, even in a call with a supervisor, because she worked from home, she said, I would always have to know that I had the answer to the next question he was going to ask me. So I couldn't appear like I didn't know, or that I was a little lost. And she said, now that I've worked on this, I can even say to him, I'm going to have to check on that. I'm not real sure. It's this being okay with being a little more vulnerable, as Brenda talks about a lot, in not looking so put together.
Well, and that's one of the things too that I thought was such an interesting perspective, and why I felt like it was so important to have this conversation, because a lot of the folks who listen to the show are people who they're interested in constantly evolving, improving, like they either want to perform at their best, or they want to find out how can they actually reach their potential. And what seemed so interesting to me was this idea that, like, this perfectionism, while it can be a positive, it can also be a detriment. And that it seemed, and tell me if I'm interpreting this correctly, a lot of the folks that you did work with were high achievers.
Oh, very high.
And is it accurate to say, or is this going too far, that folks who are overachievers, maybe that certain like type A personality type, are almost more susceptible to this than others?
It's the why of the high achiever. If again, it's just innate. In fact, you and I were talking about Victoria Garrick, and she definitely suffers from depression, and she's definitely a perfectionist. And so she said, I am just innately, she was a college athlete at USC in volleyball when they were the number one team in the nation. And she said, I'm innately competitive. I
Yeah.
want to win all the time. But her depression comes from that sense of, now she and I have not had a conversation yet, so I'm sort of paraphrasing what I've heard her say.
Mhm.
But she also had a lot of doubt, and she had some things had happened to her in the past. And so, it's how many are you perfectionistic because you're keeping secrets, because there's a part of you that you don't want anyone to know about,
Mhm.
and so you feel forced to have this facade of everything is going great all the time, and
Mhm.
your eye is on the prize and that's all it's on? Or is it more you're just sort of innately that way, but you don't have this sense of um, must, should, ought, have to,
Ah,
must always. That
yeah.
just, I mean, I call myself a perfectionist, and
Yeah.
and I always want to learn more and always want to try harder. But through my own life, I've certainly realized that my thumb in my back. I don't have to have my thumb in my back because it is innate, and I used to think I did. I
Mm.
used to tell myself if I didn't have my thumb in my back, that I would just be a slug,
Hmm.
you know. And what I've learned is that no, I don't have to have that. But anyway, these people don't know that about themselves, and um, so it is such an overlooked presentation of depression, and it's scary to me because
Yeah.
suicides are going up, and actually research shows that both perfectionism and suicide are going up together. And there's a special kind of perfectionism that maybe um, your listeners would enjoy hearing about.
Yeah,
It's
please.
so academic, but there are three kinds
Okay.
that they study. One is self-oriented, which means you just expect a lot from yourself and you expect perfection from yourself.
Yeah.
The second one is other-oriented, which you expect others to be perfect around you, which is probably not a great person to be around. And
That's probably a rough
probably
go of
pretty
life if you're going
unpleasant.
with that.
And the third one is actually the most dangerous kind as far as suicidality is concerned, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
called socially prescribed perfectionism.
Hmm.
And what that means is you feel like you always have to meet the expectations of others, no matter what they are.
Oh, yeah.
So you're not in control. As one of the prominent researchers said to me in this phone call, he was delightful to talk to. He said, it's like the more you do, the more you have to do. The more people expect of you, you're on this constant treadmill of
Yeah.
always, no, my friends, my family, my coworkers, my supervisors, anybody who needs me or expects me to be something, I must always meet their expectations, and in fact, exceed their expectations.
Hmm.
And it's
The bar just keeps, so even when you do excel, the bar just keeps moving and this
right.
pressure is just like it continues to mount.
In fact, one of the things, I'm pretty folksy therapist, and so uh, being from Arkansas, but I will say to people, so they've signed up to be they're going to try to raise $150,000 for this nonprofit. Okay,
Mhm.
they're chair of that committee. So I'll look at them and say, well, now what are you going to take off your plate? And they start laughing. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Why would I take anything off my plate?
Right.
Well, because you're this and you're this and you're this and you're this. And they'll say, no, you know what? I go to bed at 11. I'll just won't go to bed till 12 or 1. I mean, that sounds silly to say, but they don't think
No, it doesn't actually, sadly.
And so
Yeah.
it shocks them that I would ask them, so what's going to give here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what's interesting to me about this is I think you've said this a couple times, and tell me if I'm understanding this correctly, is
Probably
that
repeat myself quite a bit.
no, this is good. Part of the challenge is the individual is unable to identify this within themselves that they're actually depressed. Like they might not even recognize it. So,
Well, let me be quick to say
okay.
they know something in their gut feels off.
Off. Hmm.
The same one I was telling you who was so eloquent
Yeah.
told me a story about how she got up one night in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and she just said, I've got to find out what's wrong. Something is horribly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And she looked up depression. And of course,
Yeah.
she didn't find herself there. And she looked at
Ah.
me and she had a small tear in her eye when she said this, but she said, I felt such shame at thinking,
Hmm.
how could someone who has all the blessings in the world that I do think I'm depressed?
Yeah.
She said, until I saw the terms perfectly hidden depression, it would never have occurred to me. I, this woman had gone through years of infertility.
Mm.
She had never cried. She had never stopped trying. She had never grieved.
Hmm.
And it was severe. She had had some really traumatic things happen with
Yeah.
adoptions that had fallen through and miscarriages and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So she said she came in actually to therapy because something had happened in her life that had made her get in touch with that grief. And she didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
She just didn't know what to do with it. She didn't even know what it was.
Hmm.
And there were lots of reasons why. She also grew up in a family where no one had talked about anything other than superficial things. She had had some sexual abuse happen to her in college.
Hmm.
And she was one of those people who also just having all that experience had said, I'm going to stay in control.
Yeah. So for people who are probably listening, I imagine to your point, there's some that have heard this and are kind of like, oh man, like that describes what I'm going through. More broadly, like when people are trying to kind of like assess, they know something's wrong. Like, what are some of like the telltale signs that folks often experience? And maybe it's different for every individual. But do you see any kind of like commonalities across people
Yeah.
who kind of like fall into this category?
Well, as I was writing about it, I actually took out a piece of paper and I put down the names of the people that I had seen that I thought fit this rubric
Yeah.
before I knew what the rubric was. I said,
Yeah.
okay, and then I started thinking about what these people had in common.
Mm.
I literally started listing these things right by
Okay.
the names and kind of did the whole, okay, this person has this and this person has this.
Right.
And I came up with these 10 characteristics.
Okay.
Again, it's not a diagnosis. It's what I call a syndrome. Like
Yeah.
codependence is a syndrome.
Oh, sorry. Like what?
Codependence is a
Codependence. Got
syndrome.
it.
So it's a syndrome is a group of behaviors and beliefs that tend to fall together. You will find them together.
Hmm.
So that's what a syndrome is.
Okay.
So we've already talked a lot about one of them, which is a highly perfectionistic stance toward life, but that is fueled by shame and fear.
Right.
Lots of over responsibility, a need for control, and some worry, but you have to hide the worry. You don't look like a worrier.
Got it. You don't
Stay in
express
your
it.
head. You're very overly analytical. You don't like the mess of emotions.
Mm.
People say to me, oh, I'm just not a crier, or they laugh and say, oh gosh, if I started crying, I'd never stop. That kind of thing. Ha ha ha.
Right. They've got a quick answer to deflect.
They discount, they'd say to me, I don't know how you do what you do all day long. You just listen to problems. Ha ha ha. No, that's not what I do all day long. But anyway,
Right.
they discount any kind of trauma that happened to them. One of the best examples, I love this example because it's so shocking. I had a guy who had retired, very successful in business, and he actually came to me first through couples therapy. He probably never would have actually sought therapy himself, but he said, there's something about the way you talk that I like. So he came back by himself and he was describing, but what was happening in his retirement, he was starting to heavily drink.
Okay.
And he didn't know why that was. And so he was telling me about his childhood, and he just had this boisterous guffaw as he was telling me this story about how his mother used to scream at him and throw rocks at him and tell him he wasn't going to amount to anything. He laughed. I showed her. Ha, ha, ha. I said, don't you have a grandson? And he said, yeah. I said, I've got a yard out there. let's go get your grandson to stand in the yard and you and me go find some rocks and throw them at him.
Right.
And tell him he's never going to amount to anything. And he got this, got quiet. He said, well, I would never do that. I said, why not? He said, because it would hurt him. True. And I said, and so you were that little boy.
Yeah.
For years, you have discounted that and made yourself laugh about it when really you need to have compassion for that part of you that's still hurting. And what we figured out was once he didn't have all this feedback and affirmation that he was doing well, he did not know how to give it to himself.
Oh.
So, okay. So that's a good illustration of that one.
No, that is a good illustration. Thank you.
So I've already mentioned this, these people really struggle to feel and to express any kind of pain. It's interesting. Research shows that these folks can identify sadness. They can say, yeah, we found out my mother-in-law has cancer and we're really upset about it. If you ask them and say, well, if you need to talk to me about it, oh no, I'm good. I'm good. We're just taking care of business. They don't know how to express that sadness, to sink into it emotion and to let it show. They don't know how to do that. That's what a lot of what I do is teach them how to do that.
Well, what must be so tricky too is like some of the things that we're describing as characteristics in some ways are often attributed as strengths, right? Like, oh, he's just such a strong person. Like, oh, look at all this adversity and they're powering through it. And like, oh, they're so incredibly strong. But in actuality, it's, it's to their detriment, right? Can be.
It's in, if it's balanced, there are people who do very well in a crisis and they get it done. And yet in watching Brene Brown's TED Talk, not TED Talk, I'm sorry. It's a Netflix special.
Ah, okay. Yeah, actually I did see
got this guy that stands up and she's talking about vulnerability and you don't get to courage without vulnerability. And this guy in fatigue stands up. And he says, and I'm going to paraphrase, I'm probably going to crucify what he said, but something like, Dr. Brown, you're right. He'd been to Iraq or that area of the world.
Oh, yeah.
At least 3 times. He'd been in a tour duty 3 times. And he said, until I could not find my courage until I admitted my fear.
Wow.
And so, I'm not trying to say don't be strong or don't be stoic. I actually don't cry myself a lot. I think I just never have been, but boy, when I cry, I cry. And so I know how to enter that space.
Got it. I appreciate you making that distinction because I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but it's kind of tough to wrap your mind around. And I'm sure it's like everything, there's a scale. You're somewhere on that axis. But it sounds like, whether it's being stoic, unaddressed emotion, it's like you can start to drift into this, it's a negative versus a positive quality. And I have to imagine there's so much gray area, which makes it complicated probably for the individual and for others to identify that something's wrong.
A couple of the other characteristics, which aren't going to be probably very surprising, these people can be extremely good friends. I mean, they are the person that is there for you when you need them.
Yeah.
Very empathic. They are there, but they don't let you in to what's going on in their world. In fact, sometimes, someone might say, Jerry's a really great friend. He always remembers my birthday. But I don't know much about Jerry. Or Sally, or I don't care what the name is, Rhonda.
Right.
Then often there actually is a co-occurring actual clinical diagnostic problem like substance abuse. These people have their benzos in their purse. They take a little half a Klonopin when they get upset.
Yeah.
No one knows they have it, but they have it. Or they're drinking at night or whatever. They can develop eating disorders easily because eating disorders are about control. they actually can have some anxiety, like panic attacks or OCD, which can become unmanageable, but they actually, can have some panic attacks. And sometimes that's what brings them into therapy is they don't know what's going on. All of a sudden they've developed panic attacks.
Right.
And then they also, as we've said, are usually, we love perfectionists. I had cataract surgery, a few weeks ago, and boy, my doctor said, well, I'm a perfectionist. I said, that's good. That's very good.
Right. That's exactly who you want doing your cataract surgery.
Yeah. I don't want you to just kind of, another one.
Well, you know what? I just kind of wing it. We'll see how it goes.
She doesn't need this eye.
Yeah. Nah, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
So, and corporations love perfectionists. They want somebody who's going to get it done and get it done in less time than they said they could. But they also just struggle with really letting anybody in, especially their partners. Now, they may be attracted to narcissists who really want them to take all the responsibility. They take lots of responsibility. So narcissists don't want to take any. So they might be in that kind of relationship. They might be in relationship with somebody that is an underfunctioner and wants them to overfunction. They could also be in relationship with somebody who also wants to be perfect looking. And so they have this wonderful life together. They've got 2.5 kids and they've got dual careers and they're just doing great. And they're pillars of the church and all that stuff. And then you do have this group of people, and I've heard from these spouses that say, we've been married 14 years and I've never seen her cry, or I've never seen him admit that he feels tired. So those are the people who write to me and go, how do I approach someone like this?
Yeah. Well, and that's a really good segue too. I mean, if you are someone who's listening to this, or maybe someone who's close to you, you're like, oh man, I might suspect that, they might fall into this category. Like, for the patients that you work with, what often is like that first step? Like, where does someone even begin?
Yeah, funny story. New Harbinger was very interested in the book, and they said, we want this book, but you have to come up with a treatment strategy and you have to do it in 2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, solve this, please.
Oh, great. So there is a way out. And the book is really, it gives you over 60 exercises. I don't know if you did any of them.
No, well, that was the only thing, is I read very quickly. And as I was getting these exercises, I was like, I'm going to need to go back, and I'm actually going to need to take the time to do some of this journaling, do some of this stuff to try and like dig in. So I read them, but I haven't now taken the time to really.
I have a supposed critique on Goodreads that says, I love the first 3 chapters. It was like she was talking to me. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it turned into a therapy session. And I thought, yep, it did. So basically, some of the steps are someone has to, as an individual, and I'll get back to the other person who sees that, see this as a problem in and of itself, as we have been talking about.
Yeah.
Then there are certain hurdles. The perfectionist will they'll say, okay, I'm going to work on X. Well, X is the thing they most fear changing.
Yeah.
No. We're not going to go there. They want to heal perfectionistically.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
you have to take baby steps.
Got it.
You have to really look at the rules that you're following, the rules that you decided as a child or as a teenager. This is who I have to be, ought to be, should be, must be. I have some African-American clients right now who told me they had to be perfect looking and perfect acting and actually perfect, or they wouldn't have gotten the opportunities they got. They had to be better than everybody else.
One of my best friends in the world, I actually had him on the show. He's now, of course, really successful doctor, surgeon. One of the things that he was told as a kid was, hey, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far.
Exactly.
Which, just that.
So,
pressure,
they've said, how am I supposed to take this apart when it's why I'm successful? So, that's a complex issue to try to approach, and we've tried. And so anyway,
Mm-hmm.
the fourth one is to do some emotional connection work.
Hmm.
And that means learning how to do exactly what I'm talking about, learning how to have compassion for yourself, to accept both your strengths and vulnerabilities. I laughed with you before a little bit about that. I'm not proud of the fact, but I've been married 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been married now for 30 years. So I think I got it right
So
finally.
the last one
The
stuck.
last one's kept. Yeah. um, but, I also have 3 letters after my name. I have a PhD.
Right.
Both those things are facts about me.
Hmm.
And what I've learned through the years in my ancient age that I am is that my strengths don't define me any more than my vulnerabilities do, nor do my vulnerabilities define me any more than my strengths. They
Hmm.
both exist. I'm proud of one, I'm not proud of another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can let those be without having to hide or without having to worry what people are going to think about me if they know about one or the other. Um, so that is an important place to get to. And I think you get to there by connecting with your emotions from what you do feel shame about, what you do feel you have to keep secret.
Yeah.
You have to connect with those emotions. And then the last stage is actual change. I think insight's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
It helps you connect the dots, but insight doesn't lead you to hope. What leads you to hope is behavior change.
Hmm.
And so I know that I've accepted myself more if I make a mistake and I let it be. I just let it be. So the little things like that. I mean, so I have a whole chapter on change, which a chapter is nothing when it comes to change. But
Yeah.
if you're in love with someone who is like this,
Yeah.
that you suspect is like this, one of the things you can do is you can say, I heard this curious thing that I've never heard before, and it made me wonder if you might be interested in looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Send them a blog post of mine, send them a podcast of mine.
Yeah.
Don't tell you need to read this book.
Right.
That's
Got it. Here's what's wrong with you. Let's get to work.
That's not going to work. But you also can say, I've been your friend for 15 years or however, 10 years or 5 months or whatever it is, and say, you never share anything with me.
Mm.
And I really want to know. And they go, oh, no, you don't want to know all this stuff. Yeah, I really do. And
Mm-hmm.
so do you think it's a problem for you? And approach it like, this is my experience of you, and this is what I'm concerned about you. And have you ever thought that it could be a problem for you?
Yeah.
So a really gentle approach to that.
Yeah.
And I have had some people have said that works, and you don't come in with a bulldozer. You come in with, a much lighter touch, and
Yeah.
it can lead someone to realize that how alone they do feel.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the frightening things to me too is, along with like any form of depression, but just this idea that people can slip through the cracks because they don't even know how to label it. But what's scary, to your point, is like how rapidly, suicides are increasing in this country, around the world. And it's like, okay, well, how many people are falling through the cracks? How many people know someone who had no idea or didn't suspect or
I bet
couldn't
everybody.
imagine?
I bet everybody.
It's frightening. Yeah. I mean, I already shared, but in the last year, I can name a handful, which is pretty terrifying.
Mhm.
So,
And it's
understand.
not just adults; it's also teenagers.
No, it's funny. I have this girl that I went to high school with. I won't share her name, but she was without question someone they would identify as very popular, one of the smartest people, by all accounts, very driven, very together. I mean, and then I remember learning in college a few years later, she had taken her own life.
Yep.
And it was just one of those people that I never in a million years would have pegged. It was the opposite. I mean, if she wasn't named most likely to succeed, like she probably was second or third type of thing.
Right, exactly.
Um, And it is frightening. So I guess maybe a question, and I know that we're already kind of talking about some of the extreme worst cases, but like, what are the risks? Say you're someone who does listen to this and you're like, oh man, this is kind of resonating with me a little bit. I'm not suicidal. What are some of the other risks that tend to like manifest if this just goes unaddressed for an extended period of time or a lifetime?
Well, I'll reassert what I said about why these people who contacted me did,
Mm,
because it is so lonely.
yeah.
And you're afraid that if you begin to reveal yourself, that you'll lose all respect. There's
Hmm.
that sort of black and white thinking, all respect, all status. No one can know that you struggle because you'll be reduced in their in your reputation or in how you present yourself. Frankly, I have panic disorder. I've had panic attacks since I was in my late 20s.
Okay.
Due a lot to perfectionism, by the way.
Hmm.
Much better now. But I do still have them occasionally. And when I started talking about that online on social media, I had to stop for a minute and think, wait a minute, here I am, clinical psychologist reveals panic disorder. Not that
Yeah.
I'm anybody, I mean, I'm I'm in Arkansas. I'm in a small town in Arkansas. It's not that that many people would know. But anyway,
I understand what you're saying, though. It's,
I did. I
you assume like, oh, well, the psychologists, they have all this information. They're educated. They have a
Yeah,
PhD. Like they're probably better equipped to handle this stuff than anyone.
right.
I could understand why you would feel that way.
And I was scared that people would sort of dismiss me and my work and say, well, she
Mm,
can't heal herself. Who can she heal?
right.
I found exactly the opposite. I found
Yeah.
the opposite, that people said, thank goodness you're transparent. Thank goodness you may even have more compassion for people because you have had anxiety. You know
Yeah.
exactly what it feels like. I've had an eating disorder. I mean,
Mm,
I was anorexic in college.
mm,
So, I know whereof I speak in several instances. So, not obviously all of them, but so I have found that that kind of vulnerability, actually, as Brene Brown has pointed out in her research and in all her writing, is that it has a certain kind of strength. It brings with it a, what can somebody say to you that's
mhm.
going to hurt you or bring you down if you've already admitted it to yourself?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm not the most patient person, and I don't like. I'm kind of a little bit. I get anxious in stores and things like that, so I want to get out of there. And my son makes fun of me and says, "Mom, what in the world? You've got a plane to catch. I mean, just calm down." And, if I hadn't accepted that I'm not proud of it, but that I can be impatient, I'd probably
Mhm.
get defensive. What are you talking about? Its line is going to,
Yeah.
I would never have it right out in front of me that, yes, I know this is one of my vulnerabilities.
Right.
Time management. you
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
And, and so I laugh at it because I admit, and that's a small thing, but you have more self-acceptance if, again, your vulnerabilities are known to you and you don't mind, at least people that you trust, others knowing them. You don't want maybe the world to know, but you don't mind people who are in your circle to know.
Right.
um, and of course, I guess the more celebrity you have, sometimes the more your vulnerabilities are known, but to several. But
Mm.
still, I think it's that fear of that loss, and you live with fear all the time. People are going to find me out. People are going to figure out that I'm a hoax.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I think that kind of loneliness and fear is a terrible way to live.
Mhm. Yeah. It's interesting. It's like I said, there's certain aspects of that book that really gave me pause, and I had to like kind of look at myself and say like, oh wow, like some of this hits close to home. Some of this is not an issue for me at all. I'm actually good at XYZ. But I think, to your point, you said something like just even having the insight or awareness. And actually, I think you gave the example, like just the relief that a woman had when she found out that like there was at least some sort of name for this syndrome.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
just the heartache that she felt when she looked up clinical depression, didn't find herself there, but knew something was wrong. Like that's heartbreaking. Just I think even having awareness that like, hey, this is something that is not unique individually to you. This is something that people struggle with is like probably provides a great deal of relief, I imagine, to a lot of folks who come across your work.
Thank you. I had a conversation. Lewis Howes was who's this eminent podcaster, had the
Mm-hmm.
graciousness to have me on his podcast last year. And so
Yeah.
once again, graciously agreed to be my guest. And he's written a book called The Masks of Masculinity.
Hmm.
Actually, just being male is one of the ways you can get to perfectly hidden depression because
Yeah.
there are just so many things that men are taught. I think I was reading an article the other day that it's around the age of 8 or 9 or 10 that when little boys and little girls are born, they all have about the same emotional language. And then you will hear
Hmm.
emotional language drop out of little boys' conversations at 8 or 9 or 10. They
Oh,
learn
wow.
it's not okay to talk about, being scared or being afraid. They just,
Yeah.
that's and sadly still what our culture, part of our culture, not all of
Yeah.
the culture, but part of our culture still believes is that stoicism. And I'm not knocking stoicism.
Yeah.
It's there are times when you just can't fall apart. You need to find your strength. Whatever your strength is, you need to find it
Yeah.
and use it. But that doesn't mean, I say this phrase all the time: the glass is half full and half empty by definition.
Hmm.
So, you can find your strength in the half full part. That can be your faith. That can be your diligence. That can be your smart. That can be your creative. That can be you're a good organizer. Whatever your very athletic.
Yeah.
Whatever your strength is, you can live in that half of the glass. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing how to connect with the parts that aren't so great, that
Hmm.
hurt, that are where you're afraid, where you're sad, where you're disappointed, where you're lost, where you're whatever, is also important. You may not want to live there. I get that.
Right.
People with horrible depression sometimes live there all the time, or people
Yeah.
with horrible anxiety, and they struggle to not live there. But knowing how to connect with that part of the glass
Yeah.
is important, and then go back down into the strong part. That's fine. Just
Right.
know how to connect with the other.
Oh man, that's it's so funny that really, I don't know, kind of struck me because it's, yeah, like regardless of what you choose to focus on, it doesn't change the fact that the other half exists.
Mm-mm.
So it's about, I guess, at least understanding how to connect with it, recognize it, come to terms with it.
Yeah. In fact, one of my last questions for Lewis Howes was, I mean, he was a big athlete. He's a huge guy. And
Hmm.
now he's a podcaster, journalist kind of person. But anyway, I said, what's the hard thing about being Lewis Howes? Again, what's the half empty part about being Lewis Howes? There are lots of half full parts. I mean, he's
Yeah.
got lots of money and lots of fame and celebrity and all this stuff. People follow, and I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers he has, if again you think that's success. But
Right.
uh, he said, because when I make a mistake, people jump on it.
Hmm.
People are harsh when I make a mistake, or when I say the wrong thing, or when I give a wrong answer, or, I'm proven that, or I get confused. He said, people can be really, really harsh.
Hmm.
And it's hard to have things about you in the press that were mistakes, and you admit they were mistakes, and yet everybody knows about them and judges you for them.
Yeah.
And so, there are always underbellies to blessings. And you're a great athlete. Say you're a wonderful golfer or volleyball player or swimmer or whatever you are.
Hmm.
Hours you have to put in and the sacrifice you have to make. is incredible. And so your family suffer, whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just think it's so important sometimes to know how to connect with that confusion and that loss or fear, whatever it is.
Well, and so, I'm a father of three. My daughter's going to be 6 soon. I've got a 3-year-old, then we've got a 10-month-old, maybe 11
Ooh.
months. Jeez. But I worry about this actually, because, like, I guess I would describe myself, and I imagine, I've been described as someone who, I don't know if they use the word stoic, but like when things go bad, I tend to like, that's when I turn on, and I push through. I have no problem like dealing with adversity. I probably don't address a lot of the things that come along with that. So on the exterior, it's like, oh, he's strong, put together. He really deals with like these traumatic things well better than others, right? When in actuality, maybe I'm not acknowledging some of the stuff that's happened. Well,
Right.
and I worry, I don't want to perpetuate that with my own kids, right? I would love, if nothing else, them to grow up to be kind, loving, and self-secure people who know how to process a lot of this emotion. So I imagine myself and others who are parents, it's like, hey, I don't want to screw up my kids. What is the right way to kind of approach how to start to acknowledge emotion and process some of this stuff, especially when dealing with, kids in their formative years?
I cannot say this passionately and yet gently as much as I'd like to.
Yeah.
I think you have to talk to your children about your own vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
You have to model for them that it's okay, that dad's really strong, and
Yeah.
sometimes dad's scared.
Uh,
Both can exist in the same person.
yeah.
I was so delighted, not that I did everything right with my son. I absolutely did not, our son. But he made a mistake in college, which I won't go into. That's his life.
Yeah.
But he knew I'd made the same mistake in my lifetime.
Okay.
And so, because I talked about it as a vulnerability. And he called me and said, this has happened. And first, my mama came to the fore, and I was like, oh, I can't. And he goes, Mom, I called you because I knew you had been through this, and I knew you'd know what I was feeling.
Hmm.
Immediately shut down. And I just was so grateful. If your child becomes sad or lost, and you've never talked about being sad or lost ever,
Yeah.
they don't know it's okay to talk about.
Yeah.
And
Good
so
point.
these children that are killing themselves and their parents don't know they have any problems,
Hmm.
maybe, I don't say it's always,
Yeah.
but maybe people who developed a culture in the family that inadvertently, perhaps,
Hmm.
that parents didn't talk about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well,
you
and you
don't
said
want
something
to
there too.
overburden your children because they're children.
Yeah.
You don't want to use them as your confidant. That's called enmeshment. Just say, "Yeah, Dad gets scared. This was one time I was really scared, and I didn't know what to do with being afraid, and I I I kind of wanted to cry, but I didn't even let myself cry. I don't know why I didn't let myself cry. I could have cried.
Hmm.
Kind of process what it's like to have been you.
Hmm.
And your child will so much more readily come to you if they're struggling with the same thing.
Yeah, and the way you put it, it's like if because I mean, when we're kids in a general circumstance, right? Typically, we look up to our parents. You idolize them to an extent, and I understand that can change over time.
Yeah.
But if like as an example, if my kids look up to me and that they never understood that I also felt scared or worried or hurt, I could see how in their mind, right, when they start to experience those emotions, they could start to attach maybe like some shame to it, or being like, oh man, like I don't think my dad or my mom ever dealt with this. Like, why am I feeling this? Is there something wrong with me? And I'm projecting a little bit, but I can see how it's like just by even opening up to them that you do experience these things and it's okay and it's part of life. it can kind of like change the frame of reference for them a bit.
I was an older mom. I agree with you. I was an older mom. And so my career was very well established by the
Okay.
time I had a child.
Yeah.
And so I tried to make sure that I talked about what my own struggles had been,
Hmm.
because to a certain extent, because, you know, by the time my son came along, everything looked pretty rosy.
You're pretty well put together,
Yeah, I mean,
comparatively speaking.
boy, was that a tumultuous trip.
Now that's the title of your next book.
Yeah. So, I guess that call I got in college was a consequence of me trying to do that. Again, not burdening him, but realizing that, gosh, mom really acted foolishly as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just even being able to relate
Mhm.
is just so critical. Um, well, this has been absolutely amazing. I really appreciate this. I'm definitely going to link to the book. I'm going to link to the website. Where would you recommend for people who want to follow you? You have a tremendous podcast.
Thank
Yeah, and actually, would you speak really quickly just about your podcast and just kind of
Sure.
like the stuff that you dive into? Because I think people would love to listen to that.
Sure. It's called the SelfWork Podcast. And I started it about 4 years ago. And most of the episodes are just me talking
Yeah.
and what people have told me about a certain topic, not always perfectly hidden depression. In fact, maybe I have 10 or 12, 15 episodes on that, and I have over 200 episodes. So um, it's about something that is a psychological dynamic or a relationship issue or something,
Yeah.
and I'll research it. So I will bring you the most current research on it and what
Hmm.
other people have to say about it, and then I add my 2 cents in because I have
Hmm.
been a therapist for 28 years, 9 years,
Little bit of
a
experience there.
little bit of experience. So and then I also have a listener email that well, sometimes they leave me voicemails, but I answer those emails as best I can as well. They're about 25 minutes long generally, sometimes a little shorter than that, sometimes
Okay.
a little longer. And now I'm beginning to have guests, but I'm doing those as sort of bonus episodes because
Oh, cool.
people have told me it's kind of like having their own little therapist in their ear. So, I'm very delighted about that. I was sharing with you and bragging, I guess, a little bit that one
Brag away.
we're
Brag
right,
away.
we're right at 1.9 million downloads.
Yeah.
So that's utterly, uh, I can't believe it.
It's
But
amazing.
it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing, as they would say. But I love doing it, and so people also say that they like my voice. I
It's
had
very soothing. I have to admit, being on the phone with you, I'm in a very good place right now.
He says, I can't listen to your podcast when I'm driving because I'll go to sleep. I'm not sure. I probably put some other people to sleep in my lifetime, but
That's a good trait to have, though, as a therapist. For
so I
sure.
do that. And then my website is drmargaretrutherford.com.
Mhm.
The book, you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Give your local bookstore some business right now. They probably need it.
Oh, yeah.
Or you can actually get it directly from New Harbinger.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
And there's an ebook and an audiobook. So
Awesome. Well, and one of the things that we were talking about a little bit beforehand is just I feel it's getting better, and I'd be interested to get your opinion on this. But just the stigma around mental health and mental illness seems to be breaking down a little bit. People are standing up. We were talking a little bit before about the Michael Phelps documentary, which I haven't watched but can't wait to. I have to imagine that this is something that's so much more pervasive than most people probably realize. And I think having someone like you, to your point, you can get a therapist kind of in your ear in a very safe, anonymous way. You can start to engage with some of these topics, especially if you're feeling something. It's just such a incredible resource to people. So thank you for all the awesome work that you're doing.
sure, of course. Oh, and by the way, it's free. So I don't charge for anything that I put out there. So anyway, that's
Yeah.
just
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. Margaret, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
thank
appreciate it. And
you.
we'll have to have you back on in the future.
I'd love that. I'd love that.